This week, I'm speaking with Darcy Eikenberg, author of Red Cape Rescue, Save Your Career Without Leaving Your Job. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 256 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller. I'll be your host every Monday for discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. This week, I'm speaking with Darcy Eikenberg, author of Red Cape Rescue, Save Your Career Without Leaving Your Job. Let me read you a snippet from her bio. Darcy helps high-performance professionals accelerate their leadership in ways that work for their organizations and for themselves. With a practical, real-life perspective and with over 20 years' experience working with top companies such as Coca-Cola Company, Microsoft, and Deloitte. Darcy's clients consistently grow to greater levels of clarity, confidence, and control in their work and lives, all leading to better business results. Before launching her own business, Darcy was principal at human resources consulting firm Hewitt Associates, now part of Aon, where she served on both the Southeast and the North American Communication Consulting leadership teams. In those roles, she was accountable for developing and retaining talent and building managers and team, growing a healthy bottom line. She also innovated and led an internal coaching program supporting high-potential associates and high-revenue teams. Before we get to this week's episode, let's have a word from our sponsor, Career Pivot. The Career Pivot membership community continues to help the members who are participating in this project grow and thrive. This is a community where everyone is there to help everyone else out figure out what they want to do in the second half of life and then make it happen. Let's hear what Sarah had to say about being part of the community.
So, for example, when I was first exploring the idea of moving into higher ed and I was scheduling informational interviews or just networking meetings with people, I decided it would be helpful to have business cards. I was sort of struggling with how to, what kind of verbiage I should use. And it seemed like I needed 2 different ones and whatever. And I was able to post what I was thinking, my sort of designs on the community website, and people were gracious enough to give me really helpful feedback. So those kinds of things were really helpful and just sort of kept me moving along. Like, I feel like if I wasn't in the community, I could easily have stalled out at many different points along the way. And so it sort of kept my momentum going and kept me hopeful.
I'm recruiting new members for the next group. If you are interested in learning more about the endeavor, please go to careerpivot.com/community. Darcy reached out to me about the podcast. Darcy reached out to me about being on the podcast and offered me a copy of her book. After reading the book, I thought this would be an ideal discussion to have in these crazy times. I found the book very actionable in helping people get their heads on straight. Now, on to my discussion with Darcy Eikenberg. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the real joy of having Darcy Eikenberg, who is the author of the Red Cape Rescue, Save Your Career Without Leaving Your Job. Welcome to the podcast, Darcy.
Oh, thank you, Mark. I'm so glad to be here.
I don't know whether it's you or your publicist sent me the book. I look at it and I went, and then after I've actually read the whole book, and yes, I read the whole thing, we're very much in alignment. And I think a lot of my listeners could learn a lot about learning how to reframe their life, their career, changed their language. So I think I highly recommend the book.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it was me that reached out because I've been following you and I know the good work that you've been doing. And especially with an audience that I think we need to have more positive messages about what work can look like in our 50s or 60s, heck, even our 70s these days. So I'm so glad you enjoyed the book and I hope it's helpful for people.
Let's start out with, who did you write the book for?
I wrote the book for the professional who's had some success, right? It's somebody who they look good on paper. Everybody would look at them and say, "Oh, you've had a good job, maybe with a good company," but they've hit a speed bump of some sorts. Maybe something in COVID threw them off. Maybe they got laid off. Maybe they're just not moving forward, or what they're doing now, they feel like they're being left behind. And the truth is, we all go through these speed bumps in our career. I don't care how old we are. But for that person who is feeling like, oh, well, I guess this is just work. I guess I'll just either go look for another job. Oh, it's not working here. I need to go look for another job. Or, oh, I just need to suck it up and deal. Only 5 years to retirement, 10 years to retirement. And neither one of those options are great, because there are lots of options right where we are, just as we are, to recognize where we do have power, where we can take control of our life at work, or our life in seeking work if we're in the stage where we're looking for what's next. And that's really why I wrote the book. I wrote the book to give some encouragement, but also to give some practical advice of things that we can do and not have to wait for the world to figure everything out for us.
Yeah, one of the things that's come out of this pandemic is, number one, a lot of people are retired early, either by choice or being forced to. And two, the reality is, on average, about 50% of people retire before they planned. Right. And so, I have 10 years to work. Well, not necessarily.
Right. And I am so worried about that group, Ark, really, because what I am starting to hear through people who reach out to me through my insider community, through speaking that I'm doing, through social media, where, well, I felt like my only option was to retire. And now it's been 6 months and I don't know what to do with myself. Or now I'm really doing the hard work about where the money is. And I'm worried about, I see my mom's 95 and I'm 55. Will I be able to take care of myself if I live to 95? And so there's a lot of those bigger questions, but also the question about, work in many ways helps us have some level of purpose. And giving that up or saying, well, my only option is I should leave, that's not always the right choice. There are choices that we can make and things that we can control. And that's really what I talk about in the book.
You start out with part 1, which is reset how you think. Tell us about that.
With the premise of the book being that there's more in your control in your life at work than you really realize. You only control 3 things. You control what you think, what you say, and what you do. And so the book is broken down into those 3 sections. So when we talk about the way we think, one of the first chapters is to conquer the battle of the brain. And this is the trap that I see a lot of people get into, especially later in their careers, is that they get into what I call the swirl, right? They get trapped in that little lizard brain where it's, I'm not good enough, or maybe, I'm too old, or all these kids around me, kids being people, our kids' age, in their 30s and 40s even sometimes. But we get into this trap. And when we're in this mindset trap, we're not realizing who we are at our very best, where we can make a contribution. And so we have to first learn how to conquer the battle of the brain. And that's one of the core chapters in the Reset What You Think section, is to recognize that part of the brain that's holding you back, that's pushing you down, is not your true self. That's just the prehistoric part of your brain that is just trying to keep you safe. But one of my favorite quotes is, a ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are made for. And I think we've got to learn to separate that little voice from, the ship, the hero that we want to be, and be able to learn how to talk back to it.
I find so often in our careers that when we started our careers, we became actors. And we played roles. And I know for me, it wasn't until my 50s that suddenly I found staying in character was exhausting.
That's a really interesting analogy. And I do think that, a lot of us grew up with certain expectations, or maybe you started on a career path because that was the major that your parents said was, well, it's always going to be reliable to go into accounting or to become a lawyer or whatever. And you've never stopped to ask yourself, what do I want? And that's also part of resetting what you think. Another chapter in the book is to unveil your values. And what I find many times is that when we are feeling in conflict with something that we're working, but we can't quite put our finger on it, it's often that our personal values are in conflict with the values of the organization, and not the ones that are on the wall somewhere that no one pays attention to. The values that are demonstrated by actions and decisions. So, for example, I had a client where she really valued cooperation, but the company was turning toward an era where they were really valuing competition. And each in their own are perfectly fine values. But when you put them next to each other, it's like two keys on a piano. It's not music, it's just noise. And so recognizing that when your values are in conflict, that doesn't say you're bad or the company's bad. It just says we have some things we don't agree on. Great. That's good information to know. And so that also helps you reset how you think, to recognize what your values are.
Yeah, when I was at my last corporate gig, which was a tech startup that had been acquired, and I had a whole bunch of people around me who just simply started behaving badly, hiring relatives, just doing things that just made my skin crawl. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people said, well, why is this bothering you? I said, because it violates my core beliefs. Mm-hmm. And I eventually picked up and left. But a lot of people couldn't understand why I would leave.
Right. Because in their mind, they might have valued convenience or ease or relationships. Yep. Again, not to analyze that. And you may valued process or accuracy, or, there are things where when we look at it deeper, most every interpersonal conflict can come down to we're valuing different things. But it's a way when you have the tools, when you can see that and know what yours are, you can be able to suss out what might be able to change in a situation and what maybe is not going to change. And so then is it time to, move on to something else?
I wanted to get you to comment on the your last chapter in this section, which is listening to the whisperers.
It's one of my favorite chapters. And certainly I tell a personal story in the book about my own whispers, of finding years later, finding something I had written down that was kind of an aspirational statement that I did in some, community college night class somewhere. And it was, I wanted to be a coach and speaker and maybe write books. And, when I found that piece of paper, it was, wow, hey, isn't this cool? This is what I've done. But I looked at the date on that piece of paper, and it was dated a whole 8 years before I had ever taken any action in my corporate environment that I was in to do anything different. I had written it down in some fit of inspiration, even to take whatever class that was, but then I hid it away in a drawer. And so listening to what I've learned through that, and then from talking to many clients, is that finding the space and time to listen to the whispers, to really shut up that lizard brain voice that we were talking about earlier and listen to that smart, heroic voice inside you that's saying, yeah, this tech startup, these values are not the right ones for me. Or, there's something else I could contribute here. And I probably need to speak up and be more directive with my boss or whatever the thing is. But we've got to give that voice more noise, but we can't unless we listen to those whispers and, almost kind of turn up the volume on them. And that takes space to do it. And that takes intention to do it.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a matter of listening to our own selves, right? I always like to say if it smells bad, it's probably not good. Right?
That's great. That's great. I have a writing coach who sometimes would say, when you're trying to struggle with what's really happening, just, write down or say and record what I meant to say is, and somehow when you go, what I meant to say is, you get to the truth of the matter. And because when there are no consequences, you can kind of get to it. And I'll often ask my clients those questions. I'll often say, if there were no consequences and nobody cared, what's the one thing you'd do? And they're like, oh, I tell her that I want to lead that project. And they're like, gee, that's actually a possible thing to do. That's not made up. So listening to those whispers really helps you understand what actions to take and, helps you make better decisions for yourself.
Quick interruption. If you are enjoying this podcast, please rate it and review it on whatever podcast player you are using. And more importantly, would you mind telling a friend? Thanks, and back to the podcast episode. So part 2 is called Revise What You Say. Tell us about that.
The words that come out of our mouth are still so powerful. I worry that in the past several years, we've gotten into this mindset that says shorter, sweeter, cut it down. But the truth is that's not communicating, especially in a digital environment. We actually sometimes have to go a little bit deeper to be able to tell the story, to tell the context, to communicate effectively. And so revising what you say starts with, what is the story that you are telling other people about yourself? And I don't mean a story like an elevator pitch or something you're making up. It really is that you have a better story than you are probably showing to other people, than you are talking to other people. I tell a story in the book about a client of mine who was very respected in her organization. And then there was a merger. And all of a sudden, she's working with a bunch of new people. They're talking in terms that she's not familiar with. And she really doubted herself and really thought she was going to have to leave. But what she couldn't see is that her value, because she knew what had been done before, and she knew how to ask better questions, and she knew the business principles that they were trying to meet. And so once she could see that story, instead of the, oh, I'm the old guy, they don't want me, I don't know what they're talking about, to I can challenge them. I can make sure that everybody else understands. I can ask bigger questions. Rewriting your story can really help you step more into that heroic voice and step into that role where you are working at your best and highest use and not putting yourself down.
Yeah, to some extent, because I've been in those situations. It's learning to be humble, and I don't know everything, and that's okay because no one does.
Right. I've been saying a lot that work is all made up. And it's the same way with jobs. Jobs are all made up because every job, even if it's called the same, changes person to person, even inside the same company, because humans are messy, right? We are not robots. We can't be programmed. And so you don't have to, I think we get stuck too many times in, well, this is how it works, as opposed to how should it work?
Other thing I liked was the section on ask for what you need. Yeah, I admit I'm a guy. I don't like asking for stuff. I don't like asking for directions.
I don't think during the research that I was doing in the book, is ask for what you need. I'll tell you a secret. I said, as you know too from your work, sometimes we write and teach what we most need to know. And it was an exercise for me to ask for what I needed along the way of working on the book. And so, I did a lot of reading and I did a lot of research. And one of the things that I discovered was that we're not hesitant to ask, but we're hesitant to ask for things that matter, things that we make a perception that we're going to put somebody out. We make a perception, and we're afraid of what if someone would say no or be offended by our ask. But the truth is that many people are actually happy that you ask. They want to do things for you. And there are ways to ask. And we give some scripts in the book about, ways to ask that aren't intrusive, that are kind of, as you were talking about, humble and knowing, not kind of, hey, what can you do for me? Can you do this thing for me? But, ways that you can ask. And I do believe, especially in the past couple of years, that we've had even people who don't know you well, they understand when you need help. They understand, they want to give support. If they can, and you make it easy for them, they're going to try to help.
Yeah, I claim that when you ask for help, if you can learn to frame it in a way that the response is easy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the classic examples was the one time I was coaching a client, and she wanted a job at Capital Metro in Austin, the transit provider. Mm-hmm. Well, I knew the CEO's assistant, and I emailed him saying, didn't ask him to help get a job, but who can she talk to? So he just forwards the email to the right recruiter, who then responds within 15 minutes.
Yeah, we make the mistake so often if we're in job seeking mode of, thinking that this thing called networking, which is really asking for what you need, but this thing called networking is about, do you have a job for me? Do you know of any jobs for me? Here's my resume. Do you have a job for me? And the automatic answer for 99% of human beings, if you ask them that question, is, I don't know, but, I'll keep my ears open. And then it goes crickets. So when you ask a question that people can't win at, when they can't be successful, it's going to be frustrating. But when you ask for information, help, relationships, ask for conversations, people will bend over backward to talk about themselves, right? And that can be some of the best information on a company, on a profession, than any amount of Google searching that you're ever going to do. So people hire people. People don't hire resumes. People hire people. And so asking for what you need, thinking about even, asking for people's input on what you need to ask. It's all super important.
The other chapter in there I really liked, there are actually two other ones. One was Affirm the Squirm.
Affirm the squirm. Yes, we have to make uncomfortable our new comfortable. I see this a lot. I saw this a lot during the pandemic, but I think we were seeing this beforehand when one thing would happen. Back to that speed bump I talked about, the kind of person who I wrote the book for. One thing would happen and it would color the whole experience. It's kind of like you have a clear glass of water and there's one little drop of ink, and you drop the drop of ink in and the entire water turns black. But by volume, the ink was only just a little bit, but it colors the whole experience and makes you think, oh, well, if that's going wrong, then I should leave, or they don't need me here. They don't want me here. And we have to recognize that being uncomfortable, hitting those speed bumps, we have to say, yep, that's exactly what I expected. Oh, yep. Okay. Well, I've worked through stuff before. When am I going to work through it now and not let it throw us off and make us, not believe in ourselves anymore. So affirming the squirm is important. It's okay to squirm.
And the last one was accelerate appreciation.
I find that appreciation, both for other people as well as yourself, and expressing it, and not just thank you, but actually thank you for asking such great questions, or, thank you for going out of your way to spend some time with me today. Being very specific. When you are showing more appreciation and ramping that up on your end, first of all, it helps to build those relationships we were talking about that are really important in our workplace, but also it makes other people feel good. And when people feel good, they do good. And when you feel good, you do good. So one of my tricks is sometimes if I am feeling frustrated or feeling less than generous, it's like, where can I ramp up the appreciation, and almost force yourself to find those moments where I need to call somebody out and say, wow, I saw that you did this, and I just want to say I noticed, and good for you.
And so the last section in your book is Reinvent What You Do. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the other thing you control is everything that you do. So, this is what you do, but also things that you may choose not to do. So becoming one of the most popular chapters in the book that people are asking me questions about is a chapter called Drop Some Balls. And it really is the opposite of doing. It's figuring out, what shouldn't I be doing? What maybe am I doing that I should let go? Because, one of the big things that's contributing to a lot of frustration in our workplaces is this constant feeling of overwhelm and not being able to keep up, and the pace, the balls just keep being thrown at us faster and faster and faster. And we feel the pressure that we have to catch them all. But if we look at it honestly, there are a lot of things. I'm seeing this right now as we continue to move from the sprint that was early COVID to the marathon that is, whatever the next Greek letter variation that's going to happen, that we have to recognize that we may have started some behaviors out of kind of an emergency, but the training you do for a sprint is different than the training you do for a marathon. And so a lot of times if a client will come to me and one of the things we're working on is better time management, workload, stress management, one of the first things we'll do is look at the list of everything that they do. And most of us, we make it look too easy, right? We don't see all the stuff we're doing until we actually write it down or look carefully at our calendar and where we're spending our time. And 20 to 30% of things that are on most people's lists can likely be dropped, and not by even asking somebody, oh, please, can I not do this piece of work? Sometimes we're doing things that nobody will notice if it's gone.
Yeah, when I read this, I thought of Greg McKeown's book, Essentialism, The Discipline or Pursuit of Less.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used that book with some clients on learning to say no without saying no.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I've done that number of times in my career of where I never forget my first tech startup. I was going to China and my CEO calls me up, and I'm in a bullpen with four other managers. And he said, pick it up. I said, hey, Ford. And everyone's eyes lit up because they knew it was the CEO. Right. He says, I want you to fly coach to China. And I thought about it, and I'd be gone for 2 weeks. And by the way, I'm 6'4". And I said, Ford, I'm not willing to do that, but don't worry, I'll take care of it and I'll get someone else to go. Knowing full well there was nobody who could do what I did.
Right.
But I didn't say no.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked for a couple of minutes, and he finally said, just fly business class.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And everybody around me said, oh, you told Ford no. I said, no, I didn't. I said, I'm not going, but I'll take care of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are options. There are plenty of options. And in the book we walk through in the Drop Some Balls chapter, the options to drop balls, including just recognizing what things don't matter that you could stop doing and see if anybody notices that report that you've been doing for 3 years, that now people can access that data on new technology or in different ways. And then there are some things where you would have to have a conversation and be able to push back on somebody, or one of the strategies I like a lot is to ask for an experiment, to say, you know what? I realize how much time this particular thing is taking, and I'd like to suggest an experiment that for the next 3 months, we'll do this instead of the thing that is not working for me. And then we'll assess it. And there are very few times when somebody's done the experiment that someone goes back and says, no, we'd rather do it the old way. But we censor ourselves. We tell ourselves, oh, I couldn't possibly, not do whatever. But I suggest that people look at the things that are outside of what I call their superpower space. The things that you procrastinate, that are just, they drag you down. There are a lot of those things that if you lift up and look at it, they can change, they can just be dropped, or maybe they can be done in an easier way, the easier way for you.
Yeah, there's no question. And McEwen talks about in his book that when you say no, you actually gain more respect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And,
absolutely.
And very often it's, no, I don't want to do that. But if I do that, what else do I take off my plate?
Yeah. And I also think that this happens when people are looking at opportunities. One of the things, I work with a lot of people in communication and marketing and professional services fields. And one of the things that's become a trend in the past several years is doing a full-blown presentation or a pitch or whatever as part of the interview process. And very often people say, well, isn't that kind of like free consulting, or what is it? But they don't push back. They don't say, I'm curious, tell me what you're looking to get out of having the candidates do these live presentations, because I'm happy to answer those questions in a more efficient way. There are ways that you can challenge things, that also remembering that people don't always understand how long and how hard it is to do something. I know I do this with my team all the time, and we've trained each other that they push back at me, but it's like, I say, oh, can you just run this report? You're like, well, Darcy, remember those couple pieces of data aren't in the same place anymore. We're working on fixing that, but it's going to take a little while. Is that okay? I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So we can turn away work, and we can be respected for it too, because we're holding respect for ourselves and the contribution that we make to the company.
When someone finishes the book, what do you want them to do?
Well, when someone finishes the book, first of all, I hope that they keep it as a reference, that they go back and look at it from time to time. At the end of each book, we do have an action plan. And there's also an online toolkit that's totally free that also walks through some of the questions in the action plan. And people can find that at redcaperescue.com. And I hope that they put at least one or two of these ideas into action. Everybody's going to resonate differently. Some people, they've got their mindset on strong, and what they need to do is work on how are they communicating what they need, how are they asking for what they need, or how are they rewriting their story. There are some people who like taking the action, or again, and dropping the balls, not taking the action, that's something that they need to do. So I hope they continue to use the book. And then we're talking with a lot of companies right now about using the book within groups of managers and teams to have better career conversations, to be able to say, hey, we want you to stay here. We want you to grow here. Here are some things that you control. And I, your manager, am all for that. Let's have a better conversation about what do you need from me to be able to take on some of these strategies, or, what really resonates with you, and just start some different conversations so that people who are on the fence or could continue to grow in their careers have opportunities to do that.
Yeah, I think the pandemic is forcing a lot of companies to rethink how they talk to their employees. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the Great Resignation has shook up a lot of management and top management, because, put it bluntly, a lot of folks didn't think about how they spoke to their employees, how they treated them. Or
even in some managers' defense, that I think that because we have these somewhat artificial walls sometimes of communication, I mean, even between friends, you've probably seen it, where if we're not stopping and slowing down a little bit and actually having a real conversation, not just how you doing? Hi, how you doing? Hi. Okay, let's get to the list of things that are broken. If we're not stopping, and this is a skill that leaders can do, that managers can do, is to stop and just take that step back and say, so what's really going on? How are you really doing? And we've trained ourselves not to do that as much because it feels like slowing down in an environment where we feel pressured to go faster. But I've always said you have to slow down in order to go fast efficiently. And so I think it is a time where hopefully we're having renewed good conversations and learning some of those skills. And a lot of managers also, they're squeezed with taking care of issues from both sides and don't either have time or maybe haven't been trained in skills of really how do you help people thrive and how do you help them soar in their life at work.
There's no question. It's kind of like, because I've been a manager and there are lots of things I was never trained on how to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. It's things like I joke about writing a job description. Right. I didn't have a clue.
Right. And most people, job descriptions, they're all made up. They're kitchen sink, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this has been great. Darcy, if someone wanted to reach out and talk to you, or more importantly, buy the book, how might they do that?
Well, the book is available on all online booksellers, or you can find direct links at redcaperescue.com. And one of the ways to be in touch with me is at redcaperevolution.com. And there we also have what I call my insider community, which is where every week I share little, I think of it as a little love note. It's strategies and tips, but it's really encouragement and hope. And that's at redcapeinsiders.com. It's free to sign up. And I love to have people come into that community and chat with me through email every single week.
And we will include the links to everything in the show notes.
Great.
So, Darcy, thank you very much for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
Thank you so much, Mark, for all the good work that you do and all the people that you help. I appreciate being here.
If you're having issues with what you are thinking, saying, or doing as it relates to your career, I think you'll find Darcy's book quite helpful. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com, sign up for the weekly Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You'll get a weekly update on this podcast, white papers, and new blog posts. While there, don't forget to check out the Career Pivot community, which can be found at careerpivot.com/community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Career Pivot on Facebook and LinkedIn. You'll also find me on Twitter at Career Pivot. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-256. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.